Hi, I'm John Atack, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Hoyt Richards back again. Hi, Hoyt.
Always good to see you, John.
Yeah,
Hope
it's been a
you're well.
pleasure. Yeah, and we talked off camera about Derren Brown the last time, and
Yes, yes.
but this is a kind of an adulation of Derren Brown show, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you actually, I had seen a couple of his programs, and I'm a new fan of Derren Brown because I found a couple of his things on Netflix by chance, and I became fascinated. And then I found some of his other episodes of. Well, I first saw The Push,
Yeah,
and that was alarming. And then I saw The Heist.
yeah.
And then there was one where he's kind of doing an evangelical thing. And then there was one where he basically did like a Manchurian Candidate where he shot, what was the name of the celebrity?
Stephen Fry he's done
Yes,
two
yes, yes,
Manchurian
Fry,
candidates. One
yeah,
was
Stephen
Stephen
Fry.
Fry. Yeah,
And yeah, so I'm completely, completely impressed by his ability to just show how peer pressure and authoritarian compliance and someone's level of suggestibility can just you can have someone do things in a few hours that they would never normally do. And I thought it'd be interesting to discuss that and how it kind of relates to some of the things that we experience in cults and anyone who's quite convincing has some degree of those talents, whether it's learned or innate, and I think it's fascinating the way he kind of demasks the process and just shows you that it can happen. So for people who say it couldn't happen to them, they're witnessing it in a couple hours, just watching it all unfold. I mean, people actually pushing someone off a building. I mean, pretty extraordinary stuff.
yeah. And I mean, it was originally issued as Push to the Edge and shown here, and I'd already been a devout follower of Derren Brown for many years by then. And he's used straight hypnosis on people. He'll occasionally pull the curtain aside and show you exactly what he did.
Right.
So he's used what's called priming. He's very good at that. And at the moment there are arguments about priming. There are psychologists who are saying, oh, well, it's really not that influential and it doesn't do that much. But I think there's a problem in the setup of their experiments. And I
Yeah.
think that is, I'm very concerned about many of the kind of the mandates, the sort of declarations being made, which are because of some simple experiment, generally using a computer with no
Right.
longitudinal follow-up. And it's kind of like when James Randi came along and said, well, physicists like Puthoff and Targ shouldn't be allowed to test psychics like Uri Geller and Ingo Swann because they don't know what they're doing. And I think somebody, so the Manchurian Candidate, this idea that the CIA and various other intelligence agencies, including,
Right.
I'm afraid to say, the UK intelligence agencies as well, but they tried for years to actually erase people's memories, which Ewan Cameron was doing, the former president of the World Federation of Mental Health folks in Canada, wiping people's memories and then trying to implant new memories and directions. And this is a very significant point in terms of the debate about so-called cults, because so many sociologists have said, well, they're not making zombies. This brainwashing doesn't do that. And I agree with them. That's not what's happening. But where the CIA failed to, it's Richard Condon's novel made into two great movies, the last one with Denzel Washington and who is it, Lawrence Harvey in the first one, I think.
No,
But
I don't know. I don't know if I saw that one. Yeah.
oh, they're both superb movies. And it's a great novel, probably. I haven't read the novel, but the plot is obviously astonishing. But the idea is that somebody can be triggered to commit a murder by being shown a playing card at the wrong moment or something
Right.
like that. So they really did seriously work on this, and they really did seriously fail to do it. And then Derren Brown comes along, and he's done it twice now in
Yeah.
show.
Oh, he did it twice. Okay, because I saw the one time. So what is the process of priming? What is that exactly?
Priming is where there was a show that Derren Brown did where he had two advertising graphic designers, and he said he wanted them to design a poster for a pet cemetery. And you see the journey they take in taxi to the studio. And they go and they design their poster. And then Derren Brown walks in and he lifts up the paper over this easel that's been in the corner of the room all the time and shows pretty much exactly what they came to. And he then shows how they were exposed to those images on the way into the studio.
Oh, right.
So
that's very much what he did with the people doing the heist. You
yeah,
know, he was using certain steal your courage, or using certain trigger words that would that when put together and triggered by music and all these sort of things, he was planting certain seeds, and when they all came together, that was kind of remarkable. I don't know how many people in the audience will have seen that, but I encourage that. I mean, it's pretty remarkable, the system, even how, I think it was during that program that he tested, because he started with like 20 or 30 individuals and kept narrowing it down to the 4 that would actually attempt the heist. And it was fascinating because he repeated the experiment of where they had the lab coat guy and the pain, implementing
Milgram experiment
on the patient up to the point that would be deadly, and how many people would actually turn the lever to actually electrocute someone. And that was remarkable to witness, and see that repeated again.
And of course that experiment cannot be repeated by psychologists because no ethical board will permit it. And
Oh, really?
yeah, after Milgram in the late 60s, there was such an uproar about what he'd done. It's still one of the great battles in social psychology that Gina Perry, for example, in Australia, and I think she makes very cogent comment. I think it's well worth seeing what she has to say, that there are flaws in the experimental designs. For the Roberts Cave experiment, which is Muzaffar Sharif in 54, which is foundational to this idea of, social proof, that people will go along with the peer group, the milieu control, as Lifton would later call it. And
Right.
there are flaws in these experiments, but they can't be repeated. You can't do the Zimbardo Stanford Prison experiment because it's considered to be dangerous. So Derren Brown's in a situation where he doesn't have to worry about an ethical committee,
Right. So it's considered dangerous from the point of view they think you can't undo what you've done, or what are they saying?
It may traumatize the person severely.
Oh, I see.
And the idea that you did participate in trying to shock somebody to death.
Right.
When Milgram first, and Milgram was an astonishing genius, I think. Thomas Blasser's biography of him is extremely interesting. He figured he wouldn't live very long because his father didn't live very long, and indeed he only lived into his 50s, so he'd better get all of his work done.
Right.
We owe the 6 degrees of separation to Milgram. That was his work originally. We owe the letter experiment, where you drop a letter addressed to the Democratic committee or one to the Republican committee in an area that's known to be the opposite, and you just leave them, stamped and ready to go as if they've been, and you see how many of them are actually posted.
Oh, interesting.
So it was an experiment in bias. But he asked psychiatrists before doing his famous Yale experiments, which were in the early 60s. And he said, well, how many people will comply? And the average was just over 1%, if you averaged out what the psychiatrists all said. In fact, 100% of people were willing to pull a lever that gave a shock.
Wow.
And 60 to 65% were willing to go to the extremely dangerous XX.
Yes, right. The one that says red zone or whatever,
Yeah. And he replicated the experiment very diligently. I think there were 17 versions of the experiment. First of all, it was in Yale University, so they said, well, maybe that's influencing people, and so they moved it further away and they changed it. There was a replication of it because one of the complaints was, well, maybe people realized the guy was an actor and he was just making a noise, and so deep down they knew they weren't hurting anybody. So some wiseacre actually did it using a puppy and really
Oh,
did give shocks,
oh
and
my goodness.
puppies really were killed. And
Oh,
we'd just like to
goodness.
say that we don't approve of that kind of behavior, you know, that
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
puppies are sacred and should be treasured. But it this whole idea that, you know, for me, all of these years working with these ideas, that there is a spectrum. At one end, there's what we will naturally do as social proof, an
Right,
aspect of compliance, and at the other end, there's how you can amplify that. So
right.
with the
Yeah,
heist, what Derren Brown did, just to fill people
yeah,
in, is he claimed to be running a management training course. This was early on enough in his career that he wasn't necessarily recognized by people
right,
as a TV celebrity. So he had kind of middle management people who wanted to be better at management. And he
right.
gave them a 2-week course, I think it was.
Yes,
At the end
yeah.
of it, 4 of them individually assaulted um, a, uh, a cash wagon that was going to the Bank of England in the early hours
Right.
of the morning
Yes.
with a gun.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's fascinating because it begs the question, because obviously when it comes to the issue of having a discussion with someone of how did you get involved with the cult, or, are you naive, and all these sort of preconceptions
gullible.
have, right? Yeah. Gullible. Right. So I think it begs to question the idea of being open-minded, to, and does that make you more receptive, so to
Mm,
speak? Like if you are, I think a lot of it, I always try to explain to people, is a perfect storm, in the sense that if you are in, for lack of a better description, a seeker mode, where you're kind of asking questions about your life, about the bigger picture, why you're here, those sort of things, you are in a state of mind where you are more receptive to trying to seek answers,
yeah,
and therefore you're more, open to hearing what people have to say, because you're hoping to find something that resonates with you.
mm,
Now if you're quite
absolutely.
cynical and closed-minded, all right, yeah, maybe you are more protected, but then it begs the question, like, what type of person do you want to be? And this goes back to, like, one of our earlier conversations of, if you don't prepare people in literally in their educational upbringing, like in their teens, that self-inquiry, or the, that idea of asking, who am I and why am I here, type of things, put you in a place of vulnerability. If you're told that, but if you don't know that, it just seems to be a very organic process that
Mm,
occurs just under the natural evolution of wanting to know why you're
yeah,
here, and what maybe your purpose is, and where you fit in this the social spectrum and the world spectrum, just what footprint are you going to leave behind, type of thing. And I think if you're never warned, and no one ever says, oh, hold on, you could actually, that's a wonderful point to be in your life, but it could actually be also dangerous. Just be on the lookout for people that can manipulate you because of that open-mindedness you're now experiencing. And if you don't have that warning, as with my experience, you never see it coming. You don't process it. You actually think you are finding the answers. You think you found someone who's helping you, who's looking out for you, who's got your best interest in mind. And that's very much the bait and switch of, as I have said many times, what I signed up for in the group that I got involved with, I will never beat myself up for it. But what it actually was took me 20 years to figure it out, and it was very different from what I signed up for.
mm.
And that was the journey that I took.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to differentiate between cynicism and skepticism. That
Mm,
if you are closed-minded, you'll be cynical. You'll be miserable. You know, the only truly invulnerable people are criminal psychopaths who
right,
care about no
right,
one and who
right,
take no joy out of doing anything other than sadistically harming others. Now,
right.
if that is your career path, then good luck to you. And I
Yeah,
hope you get locked up soon in a very comfortable prison. I don't wish any harm to such people. But that cynicism where everything has a negative cast, you believe in nothing. I had a friend this young guy years ago, and
Excuse me.
of course, and he, at the end of 2 years, we'd see each other occasionally and we'd talk about things. I was about 40. He was at college. He was at university here doing computer science, and I came to know him through my nephew. And I really like this guy, and he directed some plays and did some things, and I spent a reasonable amount of time with him over a couple of years. And at the end of 2 years, he explained to me his philosophy of life. And he said, for 2 years, I've been trying to trick you into doing something unethical. And as yet, I've not managed to do it. Now, I hadn't even noticed, which is how aware I am. Let's be honest here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
He explained to me that his father used to beat his mother throughout his childhood, but that she urged him on to do this, that he blamed his mother because she would keep poking the father until he lost his temper. And I don't actually condone violence in relationships for any reason personally, but I understand that's me as an outsider commenting on it. He lived through it, and that's the conclusion he'd come to. So his mother had taught him a simple rule in life. People are out for themselves. They do everything they do out of self-interest. There is nothing but self-interest. Now, this was a dominant political view during what were called the Thatcher years in this country. In fact, Margaret Thatcher surveyed the civil service to find the answer to a simple question: do you do your job to help people, or do you do your job out of self-interest? Those who said self-interest, people we call sociopaths, were promoted. Oh, wow. And those who said they were altruistic, were paid off, or, they were pushed down because of this idea that is the true philosophy. At the end of 2 years, my friend said to me that he'd tried everything he could, and he obviously hadn't found the right things, because I'm sure he could have done, and he couldn't find out why I gave my time to him. Why did I spend time with him? And he'd gone to his mother and he said, he's not trying to get money out of me. Your philosophy may be wrong. And she said, he's gay.
Oh, God. Yeah.
And that didn't prove to be true, in fact. But as a mindset, that's the cynical, sociopathic mindset. And it's not useful to the world. It's very harmful. So the other way of approaching it is skepticism, which is saying, I'm not convinced yet.
Right.
Do you have evidence of that? So, our friend Ira Taylor.
I think that's also, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this. Do you think that's a learned response, or is that innate?
I think there's possibly an inherent base for it, but it's something that's quite easily taught. Right. I gave a talk to the Skeptics Society many years ago, and afterwards one of the guys came up to me and said, do you really believe there's such a thing as hypnosis? Yeah. I think if you look at the evidence, it's like, well, yeah, I don't care what we call it. Let's call it guided imagination. Right. Is one of the academic definitions. And I certainly believe that happens because I've seen movies, I've read books, I've had my imagination guided. And I've come to conclusions as a consequence of those things, for example, in the 1930s, there was a movie called I Was a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. And this movie changed the law, guiding people's imagination so they became aware of how brutal and awful this situation was. They started changing the chain gang position. There aren't chain gangs anymore in the US. You still, unfortunately, have one of the most vicious prison systems in the world. Right. Far worse than ours, because of this notion that if somebody's a criminal, they deserve everything they get. Shawshank Redemption. That's what Stephen King on that point.
Well, it's an interesting thing because as a screenwriter, it's one of the things I've been taught, that if you want to have your film or story carry meaning, you need to establish various stakes, to engage your audience. So the first stake is usually very tangible and simple. It's kind of the what they call the external stakes. I need to go kill the Death Star, or I need to steal a bunch of money because it's a heist movie, right? It's some sort of tangible goal that you can try to
Mm,
achieve. And then you have the inner stakes, which is the emotional journey you're on. How do I expect to be changed by going on this journey? What
mm,
do I need to learn? What do I need to learn to transform?
mm,
And most scripts are pretty capable at having those in them.
mm,
But the distinctive thing that really separates a great story from a good one are the philosophical stakes. And that's where, like you're describing, you set up what is called the dominant values in the world. And it's usually told to you somewhat by the antagonist or someone who's of authoritarian influence in that character's life, who's basically saying, kid, this is how it is. This is how the world works. This is how it is. And then usually at some point in the storytelling, you meet a mentor character who actually presents to the character the underdog values, which is like,
mm,
kid, this is really how it is.
mm,
Everyone thinks it's like that, but it's really like this. But you have to make a choice and believe, and that's ultimately where you the climax of Star Wars, which is which when you time it, all happens in less than 2 minutes. But you have the scenario of where all the dominant values seem to be coming true. The Death Star is going to destroy the rebel base, and everything's going wrong, and ships are being shot down by Darth Vader, but it's only Luke choosing to support the underdog values when Obi-Wan comes to him and says, turn off, basically use the Force, and he turns off the computer, and that is where everything flips, and that's where you as the audience get very satisfied because you're like, oh, I can do things differently, and that's very much how it works. In storytelling and very much in teaching. I think we have to establish, as you're saying, the dominant values of the world, and then you challenge them with another set of values, and you leave it up to the individual to decide what they want to do.
mm. I mean, I'm a huge fan, as you know, of Eric Fromm,
Yeah,
and his very simple structures, like saying, well, you're either life affirming or you're life denying. That's a really good way of looking at things. You're either pro-social or
yeah,
antisocial, or for most people, frankly, asocial. The majority of people contribute very little positive and do very little that's negative.
right.
And so, the hero journey, which of course Joseph Campbell, Mad Max, and Star
Yeah,
Wars, and every script in Hollywood for about 15 years thereafter, tried to conform
yeah,
with this. And of course, anything that is it's like when Jimi Hendrix went to Decca Records and they said no chance, or
yeah,
he was offered to Andrew Loog Oldham, the Rolling Stones manager, and he went, not
right.
really. Now, within 4 years, he was the highest earning musician in the world. The Beatles were turned down by every record label. And I think the thing underneath this is that occasionally somebody like Dostoevsky will come along and they'll tell the story a different way, and the
Right.
rules fall apart. I've just finished Steve. I've never read a Stephen King book. You can't live without having seen movies that come from
Yeah,
his
of
work.
course.
Um, but I've read his On Writing, a memoir of the craft, and it's a
Oh,
superb book because he
wow.
gets into this, what's plot and what's this and what's that, and he
Right.
dismisses most of these truisms. And coming from the most successful fiction writer in the world, this is
And
very interesting.
probably the most prolific. I mean, I don't know how many books he's written. I mean,
Too many,
yeah,
but
extraordinary.
you just you just think about the Carrie, The Shining, Dolores Claiborne, The Shawshank Redemption, all
Yeah,
of these stories that come out of this remarkable mind.
it is extraordinary, but what's fascinating to me is it comes back again to this question of if you are open-minded and kind of not prepared to be skeptical, then you're very, very vulnerable, and a lot of it's very unconscious. And I think that's where I think there needs to be some reminders set for us, hopefully younger than older, of just to look what to look out for. I mean, it's like I forget who the person said. They said common sense is not very common, and I think for most of us, we just we want to believe. It's like you're saying, if you're life affirming, you want to look for the best in someone. You want to expect to think that they're actually in your corner. You actually want to believe that there are people out there that potentially might look out for you and guide you and mentor you in some way. which I think is great. But you also have to develop the street smarts to know that not everyone has your best intentions in mind. And I think that's, a harsh reality that you can learn a number of ways. And I learned my way through the whole cult journey. And
Me
but I
too.
can't say it's completely transformed me to the point where I am just Captain Skepticism. I still think it's my nature to want to trust people and to think the best. But I definitely have been given some guardrails now to be careful and to be aware of. And that's why it was fascinating looking at Derren Brown and how he could really take advantage of people, and he really he doesn't. He's doing it to teach, which I think speaks very highly of him, because someone who's got those techniques at their beck and call could be very dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and he follows in the tradition of Harry Houdini, who, and I think perhaps for Derren Brown too, that Houdini really wanted to believe, particularly because he wanted to contact his dead mother. And there's the story about him with Arthur Conan Doyle, and Conan Doyle's wife. Conan Doyle, of course, wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories, and he was a medical doctor by training, so you'd anticipate that he'd be skeptical, but he wasn't. There's a terrible fairy hoax where some little girls had taken photographs of some little cutout fairies from a book and said, look, we've got pictures of fairies. And when you look at them, you can see the edges of the cutouts. It's that bad. But Conan Doyle believed it. And he was a spiritualist and he believed in all of these things. And Houdini really wanted to believe, and they became friends. And one day, Conan Doyle's wife held a seance and she wrote down a message from Houdini's mother. And there were two things that really bothered Houdini about it. The first is she drew a cross at the top of it. His mother was Jewish.
Oh, right.
The second is it was in English, and his mother had never spoken English. And that led into a little bit, but he exposed all sorts of things. Derren Brown, he's done almost everything. He's done table turning, writing on slates that are, locked together. I saw him on stage, and he did this one thing that I still can't get my head around, where he'd be blindfolded, he'd throw a frisbee into the audience, and he'd then get the person who caught it to throw it behind them. And the person that it came to, he would tell them what was on their key ring. So it's an elephant, it's green, and you bought it in Milan. And how do you do that?
Yeah. And I think, it also brings up the subject of just magic and our fascination with those things. And I think one of the most compelling things that happen in the world of influence and brainwashing, or whatever way you want to call it, is our innate fascination with our beliefs being tied to something you can't prove, like we're talking about, right? With how much more engaging that is to the human psyche to be, to prove something in a lab doesn't get people that excited. But if you say to them, no, this is true, but only if you believe it. Mm-hmm. Now you get someone's attention, and now they're going to sign up. Now they're open their pocketbook. It's fascinating under the guise of faith and belief and, for lack of a better description, magic possibilities. That is so enticing to the human psyche, and that is something we just now I can't say everyone, but certainly I mean, that's one of the reasons I got into the movie business, is that idea that you can create what is almost impossible, except for the imagination, replicated on screen so that you can almost have that experience. And how powerful that is. And it's really interesting to look back on how I found myself in that situation, and I can see the signs. It's like and again, I don't beat myself up for it, because I think I'm not alone with a lot of us, are fascinated by those type of things. But again, it's just not always with the point of view that we could be putting ourselves in a situation where we could be manipulated or influenced or somehow controlled. the temptation of the possibility that it could be true is just too tempting. It blocks out everything else, you know.
And the vast majority of human beings believe in magic.
Yeah.
There was this, I think, probably something like 85% of people have some religious belief throughout the world. But those who don't, there was a wonderful survey a couple of years ago of atheists, professed atheists, and it was found that 70% of them, on average, and the survey was done around the world, about 70% of them believed in the supernatural, even though they didn't believe in God. And which is a position that Shelley took when he wrote The Necessity of Atheism, which got him thrown out of Oxford a couple of hundred years ago. But yes, that so I think that's, and I don't think, I was talking with Chris Shelton a month or two back, and he said, well, maybe as parents, we can say to our children, you see, we deceived you about Santa Claus. And really, that's a way of showing them how this works in the world. And I didn't like to say to him, I have 4 children. I never pretended there was a Santa Claus. I never put a white beard on. It didn't seem relevant to me. They knew the presents came from me, and it was all fine. They had happy childhood. So, the Easter Bunny and all of that. But we do have this longing for understanding. And if you look at it, just keeps coming back, wishing and hoping and praying and dreaming that it's this whole idea that you can somehow bend the world to your will, or get God to care about this one little planet in the hundreds and hundreds of trillions of planets that are probably out there. The law of attraction, Christian Science, Scientology, prosperity Christianity, these ideas, the Honzon scroll that Tina Turner prayed to, Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? It seems from where I live, aged nearly 66, to be rather childish, to think that you can use the power of will and attract to you these things. That there are better things to do with your life and your mind. And I think the thing, exactly as you say, when you're young, you and a seeker, and many people their whole lives, you desperately want to understand. And the point is, we don't really understand, and there's nobody who can tell you. You can find an understanding of the world and how to live in it for yourself. And I would say that anybody that wants to charge you money for that, anybody that wants you to work for them, slave for them for that, it's a con trick. Anybody that actually has got some wisdom to offer you will give it freely, and they will walk away. They don't want to control your life.
No, I think that's a great rule of thumb, and and it also brings up the issue of just most religions or spiritual outlooks on things. They all involve some form of magic. It's like when I, being brought up Christian and just, having more recently, obviously in telling my story of, there's this fascination of, well, what did you believe? And how could you believe these things? When you hear them, they sound crazy, right? And I've really had to try to emphasize to the director of the project that ultimately, it's not so important the minutia or details of what the crazy thoughts I bought into, because that is a normal human procession of ideas when you are seeking something, And I said, if you look at the commonly accepted religions, there's plenty of crazy beliefs that they hold, but because they've been established for hundreds of years, it's accepted as fact. When if you actually just take it on face value, it's as crazy as anything. Moses parting the Red Sea, Noah, picking out 2 of every animal, and all these things that if you just walking on water, all these type of things that if you just take them in current day, like would you happen? It's magic. It's absolute magic, and therefore try to compare like, oh well, because it's established and because it's been around for so long, it's somehow more valid than the new crazy that you described, that you're involved in whether it involves spaceships or, like Scientology, it's a whole sci-fi story, and all that. So ultimately what I was trying to explain to them, I said, it's not important what you buy into, because people just naturally buy into some form of crazy. What's more important is, how did you get to the point where you decided it was either too crazy or you couldn't take it enough and you needed to get out and you needed to make sense of what happened? I go, that's the important journey. The actual details of the crazy really are like the low-hanging fruit and the distraction from the bigger journey of, when you go down that path, what takes you back to something that's more real and more grounded and more actual in what our experience is. I go, that's the journey that's really important. But it's such a temptation to get lost in the sauce of the details of like, you believed what and how did you do that, and that's not the point, really. At the end of the day, of course, that's interesting, because that's what kind of sets one group away from another. But ultimately, that is not the important journey. And I think that's really hard for people to grasp, because people are always looking on from one point of view or not, just to say, well, that's crazy, I would never believe that, and now I feel safe. And the truth is, listen, you bought into some form of crazy multiple times in your life, so why are you feeling safe because you're judging someone else's ability to believe in something more crazy than you think you could believe in? But you've probably got a whole case study of things that are plenty of crazy that, if you looked at them, are comparable.
And perhaps that's what open-mindedness really is, where you don't have that fanatical faith in your own beliefs. Many years ago, I was talking with a Baptist minister, and he said, do Scientologists really believe that 75 million years ago, this Prince Xenu blew people up in volcanoes with hydrogen bombs and collected their spirits and did all this stuff? And I looked at him and I just wasn't thinking, I'm not a very clever person, despite what some people think. And I just looked at him and said, there are people who believe that was a man who could not only walk on water, but turn it into wine. And he blushed. I'd never seen anybody turn beetroot red before. And I realized I was talking to a minister, but people have their own supernatural beliefs. And I think the thing is to say, well, as Jesus said, when Thomas said, I don't think it's you, which is an interesting thought, that somebody who'd been his disciple for a couple of years didn't physically recognize him. But moving on from there, Jesus said, put your fingers in the holes. So this whole idea of having faith and having to have faith and having to be committed, that's not what Jesus taught. Jesus taught doubt. He taught, check it out. The Buddha taught it even more severely in the Kalama Sutta, where he says, don't believe anyone, including me. Don't believe your parents, a spirit, someone who whispers in your ear, your teachers. Check things out. And that, being able to check things out, being encouraged as a child, the intelligent disobedience that Ira Chaloff puts forward, where you should be able to assert yourself and say, I'm sorry, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't quite understand that. And we tend to be raced along. And most of the gurus, when you look at it, they talk gobbledygook. They talk nonsense, and you're sitting there thinking, oh, when I'm advanced enough, I'll understand what that means. It's like, really.
Exactly. And I also think it's so fascinating what you just said, because my cult leader used to always say similar things of, don't just believe it because I say it, think for yourself.
Yeah.
But he was doing it in that NLP way of like, you better not do that because I do know it all, and so that's what's fascinating. You have to learn that side of it too, that a lot of people cover their tracks that way, but the way they're saying it and the intent behind it is actually the opposite of what they're saying. And that's a very powerful influence technique.
Yeah, in Scientology, one of the hundreds of thought-terminating cliches is, what's true for you is true. And that's a ridiculous reversal, because it's saying, hey, if you believe it, it's true.
Right.
That's not actually what's true. You also get the arrogance of belief, the elitism, the sense of superiority. And I'm an agnostic, which is the safest position for anybody to be in, because you can't knock my beliefs because I don't have any.
Right.
And I do feel guilty sometimes. Some militant atheist is banging on about how evil religion is and all of this, and they want to go out and I'm kind of going, well, Stalin was an atheist, wasn't he? Wasn't Mao Zedong an atheist, the two greatest mass murderers of all time? And they're like, yeah, that's and they're angry about it. They're passionate about it, which is always the problem. And so I say to them, all right, okay, God didn't create the universe. How did it come about? And they say, it was the Big Bang. And I say, prove it. And they go, oh, it's the background microwave radiation. I say, yeah. So 13.7, just over 13.7 billion years ago, there is an echo that can be measured from the sky all around us that something exploded. What? And they go, oh, it was a singularity. And I go, and what was the singularity? And it might come to the point where they say it was an 11-dimensional P membrane, but most people haven't got that far in their study of physics. And I'm saying, so let me see if I've got this right. There are people who read the Bible and believe what it says, and you believe Scientific American and what it says. But have you actually read Stephen Hawking's mathematical proof of the Big Bang yet? And I've not met anybody who has. So there's so much sense of superiority. I belong to the right club. I know the right things. My view is more sensible than your view.
Yeah.
And it's much better to, I'm a big fan of Zhang Su, the Chinese Taoist philosopher, who basically said, don't know where I came from, don't know where I'm going, perfectly happy to be here.
No, I think that very much is a place where I've arrived to, and it's just fascinating to see how people identify with their belief system. I mean, basically, if you consider what your identity is, very often it's tied to whatever your belief system is, and then you're looking for like-minded people on some level where you feel a connection to them.
Yep.
And
echo chamber.
Yeah, exactly. And yet it is highly individual, and yet we're, I think because we're such social creatures, we're hoping, because this is the peer pressure, we're hoping to find security in the sense that I'm not the only one who believes or looks at the world this way.
Yeah.
And so it's a natural dynamic that needs to be not only accepted but also understood to the degree of how that natural dynamic can also be twisted and turned in ways if someone has a hidden agenda, so to speak.
Yes.
And I think that's what's to me interesting, is that you follow a natural course of discovery and wanting to learn and wanting to grow and wanting to expand, not recognizing that perhaps there's someone who's that you put in a position of authority, or you put in a position of knowing something, and it's just your belief in them that is acting as the main impediment to you seeing something another way. You just kind of accepted this person, and I think it's very hard when someone appears to us through, in the first impressions, to be kind of a truth speaker, that they say things that resonates with us, and it actually hits a chord on some level. And then it's very much a process to want to say, well, okay, in my need to make sense of the world, I'm identifying this person as someone who speaks the truth. So now anytime they speak, I'm going to consider it to be truthful.
Yes.
And we don't realize how dangerous that is,
Absolutely. And
it comes back to the human element, like you're just saying, like reading Stephen Hawking's book, like, as fascinating, I haven't read that book, but I mean, as fascinating it may be, it's still one man's point of view. And how much can be proven from what any one man says versus just what they've gone through in their own, they've created experiments and things that only they've seen, so they process it their way, and who's not to say that someone else could repeat that and get a different answer. So there's no sure thing in it, but that need to try to find the sure thing, I relate it to very much seeking out the shortcut without knowing that's what you're going for. You're hoping to find the secret formula, the secret answer that will solve the issues that we confront in daily life, which is challenging. And the truth is, life is challenging, and I think it's meant to be challenging. And this idea that we're going to arrive to a place where it's all going to make sense is the trap, and like you're saying, that to have the point of view of like, listen, I don't have to understand. I can just trust, I guess, on some level that whatever I'm going to come across, I'll do my best to figure out, but I don't have to have it all figured
No,
out.
and
I think
I
that
mean,
power of being okay with saying, I don't know,
mhm,
and I don't have to know, is something people shy away from, when actually it can probably be one of the most empowering things to embrace.
absolutely, and the idea that the universe must make sense is a human idea.
Right, right, right,
It's not something gifted to us by God or gods or anything. We think it should make sense. And
right,
I, many years ago, differentiated how from why. How I can deal with. Why?
right.
Who knows? Is there any sense? Is there any meaning? Is there any purpose? Does that matter, really? And in the end, I'm not sure it does. That I got in Scientology because I wanted emotional equanimity, and I believed it could offer it to me. I was very distressed. I was 19, and
Right,
the girl I was living with had run off with one of my friends. I mean,
right,
you're not meant to do that to me. And the worst thing was that I knew that my offense was about being abandoned. It wasn't. It absolutely wasn't love that I felt. We'd lived together 15 months, but
right.
it wasn't love. It was. I felt offended. How could anybody abandon me? I'm
Well,
such a lovely person. But
and your feelings are hurt, right? I mean, it's perfectly natural, right? You want to make sense of that.
yeah, and my feelings were profoundly hurt because at 19, your power of emotion is overwhelming, and you look for salvation. You look for someone who can save you. And I read this book, Science of Survival, which actually seemed very straightforward. It didn't have any of the science fiction in it. It didn't have past lives
Right,
in it, which I was willing to believe because I was coming from Buddhism. But
right.
um, I wanted to achieve this serenity, this equanimity, so that things would not knock me over and cause me to have this, traumatized response. And I believe that could be done. I believe from, my 2-year experience of Zen Buddhism, I'd learned Zazen in a monastery and all of this stuff. I believed that it could be achieved, but it wasn't being achieved by meditation, and it
Mm,
wasn't being achieved by conversations with
right.
a master. Um, and I came later to believe that the sect I belonged to, which was Jiu Kennett's sect, is actually a dangerous cult. But there you go. The president of her group actually defected and wrote a book to that effect. So, friend of Steve Hassan's.
Right.
But nonetheless, I came to Scientology as some quick route that I thought would give me emotional equanimity. When I left 9 years later, I realized that I was emotionally in a worse place than I had been at the start, that it had done nothing to assist me emotionally. I had had wins. I'd
Yeah.
had these moments of euphoria, these moments of, what seemed to be realization,
Yeah.
cognition, as they call it, misdefining the word for thought, but that's Scientology for you. And instead, I, here I was. And the first year after I left, because I was an artist, I had a one-man show. I was doing all right. I was
Right.
making a little bit of money, and I was very happy with the work I was doing and very committed to it. But there were all these people who were really wounded, and I seemed not to be wounded because I'd not been as immersed as they were. And so I set about researching. I have a bit of a historian's nature, and I interviewed lots of people, and all these people kept coming to me. And for a year, I felt, for the most part, extraordinarily happy. I was
Mm,
28 years old.
right.
And what I felt happy about was very simple. I no longer had to conform my thoughts or my behavior to anybody's rules. I realized that. I'd
Yeah.
been trying to work out this morass of information.
Yes. Right.
Hubbard is listed in the Guinness Book of Records as the most prolific writer in all history. Now, there is a certain amount of cheating that went into getting him there because a lot of it's transcripts of lectures and things like that. But
Right.
putting that aside, it, he, this verbal diarrhea that this man produced, making any sense of it. What were the important bits? What mattered? It was such a challenge. And then one day going, I don't have to believe any of that anymore. What's more, I no longer believe any of the things I believed before. How interesting. You know, I can choose to believe. And I think that's supposed, for me, that's about what adolescence should be.
Yeah, right.
Where you start going, I can be responsible for me and for what I think. And then your adulthood, which comes about when you're about 95. You know?
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, and I think it reiterates that idea, like you joined there thinking you had some shortcut that you were going to, you know, solve this problem, right? And even if it's not presented that boldly or that emphatically that that's what they're, you know, that is the appeal. That is the, you know, and that's where all the compliments of you're special and you're so unique and you have this great potential. It's all basically saying you don't have to do what everyone else has to do because you're special. You get the shortcut. And how
just give us your money
to all of us, right? I mean, and I think also it's like that escape of pain that we're going to somehow give you the solution so you don't have to experience trauma, you don't have to experience pain. And that's another bill of goods, because I mean, well, you're in a human body, that's going to happen. That is all, it's all that's unavoidable. But there's such a impulse to seek out something where you think that that's not going to be the case. And I think that's one of the levels of maturity is recognizing that these are inevitable forces that you're going to have to deal with your whole life. And it's not about figuring them out, it's just managing them and recognizing that everyone's doing it, and there is no free lunch and there is no shortcut per se. And that you know, I love the type of philosophy that says no matter where you go, there you are. Like, you are always supposed to be exactly where you are right now. And I think there's a lot of strength in that. And that fixation that you should be somewhere else, or you need to get to another level, or you need to get another sash, or another reward, and then things are going to be better. That's a bit of the dog chasing its tail, you know.
I mean, I believed in the concept of enlightenment, moksha, samadhi, satori, whatever we call it, illumination. And I've read, you know, a fair amount of mystical literature from Sufi, Buddhist, Christian, Hindu traditions, all of which I find fascinating and I don't dismiss. I think they're attempts at psychology, and sometimes they're rather better than much of the psychology you have. I end up with, you know, a few individuals, Lao Tzu, Jiangsu, Baruch Spinoza, Michel de Montaigne, people who really seem to have settled into life and lived. But I still believed until, you know, into my 50s, right through Scientology as well, that there would be this enlightened state at this point where I would understand, you know. And that took an awfully long time to go away, and for me to say, I don't want that. I actually don't want that. I like being human. And that then turned me to go, well, what is important? I have 4 kids and a grandchild. My family is important. I have 3 brothers. I looked after my mum in the last 17 years of her life, fairly intensely during the last 4 or 5 years. And which was great. It was a pleasure and a privilege to be able to do that, because she was great fun. You know, she was, you know, and thankfully she never entered dementia. So she was a great companion. She was interesting. She was not educated. She left school at 14, went to work, but she was smart and she was compassionate and decent, you know, and yeah, so that was all good. And I gradually came to realize that what mattered to me was relationship, that there would be points of collapse, there would be dreadful things that happen. But if I had strong, life-affirming relationships with people, then that would sustain me. And in fact, I must say, Hoyt, that, you know, I kind of accidentally fell into running this channel. All I wanted to do was to teach 13-year-olds about human predators, their methods of seduction, and how to tell facts from fiction. Just 3 things. And the videos are there. We did them 2 years ago. We've redone them.
Right.
But I then started going, well, how do I get subscribers so that, you know, people will look at this? And I thought, well, I'll go and talk to interesting people. And it has been such a joy to talking with you, you know, talking with Pat Ryan, Joe Kelly, Joe Zimhart, and, you know, quite a number of other people.
Sure.
And realizing how much we share and how positive, you know, this notion of the thriving survivor, how positive our lives have been, because, you know, I differentiate happiness and pleasure. For me, pleasure is a very good thing and I really like it. But that's sort of my reward at the end of the day is, you know, I'm going to enjoy my food. I'm going to, you know, whatever. I'm going to sit down and watch Derren Brown on the TV. You know, that's pleasure. But happiness is where somebody comes back to me years later and says, "Oh, we had this conversation, and you know, it you know helped me put things into focus, and things have worked well for me since." You know, but then as Robert Kaufman, who wrote the first book to be called Inside Scientology, having which talks about how he became a superhuman and ended up in a mental hospital doing Scientology. But he has this great line in it. I knew him at a distance. We corresponded for a while before he died. We haven't corresponded since he died for some reason. I'm not really quite sure. It's probably because I don't have a Ouija board. But nonetheless, at the end of his book, he says, "So I left the crazy science fiction world of Scientology and re-entered the crazy science fiction world of reality."
Exactly.
And it is. Nobody's actually made sense of this stuff yet.
No, I think that's the beauty, and I think that is something that comes, I guess, with maturity or age, where
if you're lucky,
really resonates with me is that idea of how important relationships become, and connection, and family, and you know, the simple things, like for me, like you're describing, knowing I've impacted someone I care about brings me happiness.
yes.
It's no longer this chasing of egocentric ideas of achievement and status and fame. Those things, you know, that does not fascinate me. There was a time, you know, and I think a lot of that's driven from that inner feeling of lacking, that you think you need to be more to get the love you're looking for, you know, on some level. And I think when you invest in the relationships you already have, if they're healthy ones, you get all of that in droves, right, with the people you can actually interface with and actually have a conversation with. And that's so much more satisfying than having 10 million followers who think the outfit I just had is fabulous. Like, you know, so it's a fascinating, crazy science fiction world we're living in now. But I think because of that, there's an opportunity to kind of look behind the curtain and say, the thing you're looking for is actually already here, and you just need to pay attention to it. And I think that's been a revelation of mine, and that's why I so enjoy like the conversations we get to have. And
me too.
You know, it's, you know, one of the reasons I told people, they're like, "Why are you regurgitating all this stuff, you know, telling this docu-series?" And I said, to be perfectly candid, I said, I enjoy the conversations I have after people know I've gone through this thing, because then I seem to have really interesting conversations. But usually everybody wants to know what happened, and this is a one fell swoop. Whoever cares can watch it. They'll know everything, and then we can have the conversations that I really want to have, because these are the conversations I enjoy. And it's only from that perspective of knowing kind of what I went through, and you and I having similar backgrounds in that sense of going through something, these high control. There's an immediate, I don't need to explain things to you. And that's where there's an ease of conversation and communication, which I relish. And those are the type of things I look for these days. I'm not in the business of convincing someone or defending myself or any of that. You know, it's like, if you can't see the value I bring, then I don't need a million friends. You know, the friends I have really do. And that's what I'm grateful for. And that's what gives me the thriving survivor mentality. Is there have been people that stuck by me or stuck with me through all that, and that's been a beautiful silver lining to the whole process.
Yeah, and I think the kind of, I love Fromm's definition of narcissism, and he gave us the malignant narcissist
Right.
idea. It comes from him, a book called The Heart of Man in '64, what is now called the narcissistic personality disorder. And he says, well,
Right.
Freud and Havelock Ellis, who was the first to pick it up, are wrong. A narcissist is not somebody who loves only him or herself. A narcissist is someone who doesn't know how to love, and they substitute that by being adulated by others.
Right.
And it's
Right.
so much a goal, excuse me, in our society to be admired,
Yeah.
and Hubbard contradicted himself as ever by saying the highest and best particle is admiration. And he also said, never desire to be liked or admired. So we were a bit caught there as ever. But it does, that in the end, it's not how much do people like me, what lovely things do people say about me.
Right.
It's Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching, and everybody should rush out and buy my translation of it. Really, they should. Absolutely, right now. But he says the best leader is the one of whom people say, we did it all ourselves. And to arrive at that point, and I first read that when I was 17, and my ego won't allow for such things. Absolutely, you've got to say, John helped me do it.
Right.
But that point where you realize the joy in the community, that something has been achieved. I say it again and again. I received a letter years ago from a woman, and she said, you won't remember meeting me. And she was right, which saddens me. But I spent an afternoon with you 15 years ago, she said in her letter.
Yeah.
And at that point, Scientology had destroyed my life. Yeah. And from that afternoon on, everything went well, that I'm happily married, I have children, I have a career. And I attribute that to the transformation that took place in that afternoon. I'm still really pleased about that. And that was about 15 years ago, I got the letter. That thought of, yes, you want to put something out into the world that, for me, the search from, being a teenager has been for the truth. And that's how I framed it when I was 14 years old. I wanted to know the truth, even if it was horrible. I wanted to know the truth. And I think, where I've come to is that what I want to do is reassure people that it very likely could be better. It might not be, it might not, but doing things that are life affirming, that are helpful to other people, looking after your own health. One of the decisions I had to make when I was harassed for 16 years solid by Scientology on a pretty much a daily basis. I was involved in 10 lots of litigation over in New York and over here. And it was, they seek to just grind you down to nothing.
Yeah, right.
The guy who stood up to them before me in the UK, Neil Duddy, who was an Anglican vicar, ended up walking off the side of a mountain. And one of his friends told me that he thinks it was deliberate because he just couldn't take the amount of horror that was being visited upon him. But I came to the end of that period of my life and found that, there are positive values, and it does come from your attitude of mind. I have been betrayed by close friends after Scientology. They were not Scientologists, but Scientology is so influential. By 1993, I had 5 agents in my close circle who were reporting back, recording conversation. It's a horrible, horrible thing. It's an intelligence agency. It's not a religion. But nonetheless, what I'm pleased about is I still trust people. I'm kind of guessing that at the end of this conversation, you won't write a knowledge report on me to Scientology.
That's right.
And that the way that I sustained it with Scientology was, yes, they were recording everything and anything I said. So you have to be sincere, and you have to be positive. And one of the nicest things that was ever said to me, their head of intelligence came to harass me, and she ended up defecting and telling me what she knew. And she said that she'd had 18 months of running harassment against me. And she said that several people had come back to her and said, I just can't do this anymore. He's such a nice guy. And you go, yes, that's who I want to be. I just want to be a nice guy. I don't want to be a saint. I don't want to be a guru. I don't want to be a pundit. I just want to say that the best way to be is to be pleasant and friendly towards humanity, you know.
Absolutely.
Something comes from that, hopefully.
Amazing.
I'm gonna recommend one Derren Brown thing, because this is, remember, this is a song about
That's right.
This is a conversation about Derren Brown. He did a show which I think is up on YouTube somewhere with the actor Simon Pegg, and it's a little 10-minute segment. And what he did was he had Simon Pegg write down on a little bit of paper what he wanted for Christmas or his birthday or something, seal the envelope, put it in his wallet. And then a few weeks later, he had him on the show, and he goes through a conversation where he's going to work out what it is that's written on the piece of paper. And Simon Pegg says, yes, I wanted a red BMX bicycle. And then he takes a piece of paper out and it says leather jacket. And he can't believe it. He's like, no, I wanted that. For once, Derren Brown actually takes you through every step, all of the little verbal tricks, all of the priming in the environment that convinced, in just a few minutes, convinced Simon Pegg that he'd actually wanted this thing, which was what Derren Brown had put in a box to give to him.
Right.
We all need to realize it is that powerful, that we can be influenced to create false memories, to, you know, believe things that are not at all true. And by sitting back from that, by understanding our vulnerability, we have some hope. You know, when you, it's a story I've often told. I interviewed a guy, he was on the watchdog committee of Scientology, the 14 people that ran it, not the president of the church, not the executive director international. They were low down. These people answered straight to Hubbard. He was there in 1981. And I spent 2 evenings, you know, in a secret location. I've never named him in public. And he was one of 3 people on that committee who I talked to. So his information was confirmed, and it was ridiculous. Much of it. Hubbard was going crazy at this time, quite evidently. But at the end of our conversations, he said, the great thing is, John, we'll never be conned again. And I looked at him and said, oh, no. No, the great thing is I know I'm very gullible. And I am. What can I say? This has been
great, you know, because and I think that's what it comes down to. Ultimately, it's the humility at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely.
I think that's what it really is, and that it's humility that gives you peace of mind.
Yes.
You know, this thinking you need to arrive somewhere, thinking you need to be somewhere, you need to have some sort of status or standing or house or car or whatever, all those sort of things. Listen, you know, those are all great, but ultimately, if that is what you identify yourself with, then you're probably you know, struggling. But if you're just kind of humble, like then life seems to make a lot more sense, I think.
Yep. I've mental health and mental wealth. A wife I love and who loves me, I've all but riches bodily, as we put it. Yeah.
Beautiful.
He also said, love seeketh not itself to please, and for itself hath no care, but binds it to another's ease, and makes a heaven in hell's despair. I can't remember whether it's the clod or the pebble that says that, but there is the nasty rejoinder, love seeketh only self to please. But I think it's true that by having trusting, friendly relationships, you know, if you get into trouble, you can come to me and I will do whatever I can to help you. And that's the way it works. And
that is the way it works. Yeah.
We exist as a community, you know, and I think the kind of Western individualism and the idea of, you know, me being perpetual and living forever, which is, you know, frightened the life out of me. I come from Buddhist, where it's the fear of the eternal return, you know. You're trying to get off the wheel, not keep it on. But that's what matters, and having these conversations. And
absolutely. Well, always a treat, John, and I wish you a great day. I'm sure it's getting late there now, so.
Yep. Well, it's 5:20 in the afternoon. What can I say?
There you go.
Okay, it's been fantastic, Hoyt. I'm John Atack, and the wonderful Hoyt
Absolutely.
Richards.
Looking forward to the next one. All right, John.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.
Pleasure's a very good thing, and I really like it.